She walked through the door like nothing had changed. Sunburned cheeks, messy hair tied in a knot, dragging a suitcase that looked heavier than her conscience. There was a strange glint in her eye. Not guilt, not fear or something colder. Indifference. I didn't ask where she had been. I already knew. 3 days earlier, a mutual friend had accidentally sent me a photo from some coastal town. Marin, my wife, laughing over a candle at dinner with a man I recognized only from Christmas parties. Nolan, her so-called travel companion. They didn't look like friends in that photo. I spent those 3 days in silence. No frantic calls, no desperate texts, just sitting at home, staring at the empty chair across from me, realizing it had been empty for a lot longer than I cared to admit. And now she was back, standing in our living room, smiling like she just returned from a yoga retreat. "I brought you something," she said, tossing a small souvenir bag onto the coffee table. Inside was a cheap keychain shaped like a seashell. A keychain, as if that would patch the cracks she had carved into our marriage with her bare hands. I didn't make a scene. I didn't demand answers. Instead, I waited silent, as she unpacked her lies along with her clothes. She talked about sunsets, about seafood, about the freedom she felt, about how people change when they travel, how sometimes a journey opens your eyes. I nodded at all the right moments, pretending to listen. But inside, a storm was gathering, because in her suitcase, tucked between shirts and sandals, I saw something she hadn't meant for me to find. A second phone, still buzzing with messages from Nolan. That's when the decision came, sharp, immediate, final. She wasn't staying here another night. Not in my home, not in my life. And if she thought her journey had opened her eyes, she was about to find out mine had, too. I didn't confront her right away. No shouting, no theatrics. That's what she probably expected. A husband unraveling at the seams, maybe begging, maybe crying. But I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I simply picked up her second phone from the suitcase, held it up silently, and let her face tell the story. For a few seconds, she stood there, frozen, like someone caught in the middle of rehearsing a lie they suddenly forgot the words to. Then her shoulders sagged, and the fake brightness drained from her face. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she mumbled, as if that somehow mattered. It just did. How many people have said that exact line? I wondered. How many had torn their families apart over something that just happened? I sat down calmly in the armchair across from her, flipping through the phone. The messages weren't hard to find. The two of them had been sloppy. Love notes, pictures, plans. At one point, Nolan had even joked about picking out rings in some tourist market. Rings? The same woman who once sobbed into my chest, promising we'd grow old together, was now daydreaming about a fresh start with a man who couldn't even keep a job for more than 6 months. Still, I wasn't angry the way you might expect. The rage had burned itself out during the 3 days I waited for her return. What I felt now was something cleaner, sharper, a clarity I hadn't known I was capable of. I told her she had 2 hours to pack whatever she wanted and leave. She blinked at me, confused, as if expecting negotiation. She said, "Maybe we can go to counseling first." I almost laughed. Counseling? After weeks of secret hotel rooms, weekend getaways, and 2 phones worth of betrayal. "No," I said simply. "We're done." Her voice shifted from soft to sharp almost immediately. It was a strange thing to watch the person you once loved morph into something petty and venomous right before your eyes. She accused me of being cold, of giving up too easily, of not fighting for us. As if I was the one who had taken a sledgehammer to our vows. I didn't argue. I didn't owe her that. Every second she stayed under my roof was a second too long. She left that night, but not before trying one last stunt. She grabbed the photo albums from the bookshelf, clutching them to her chest like a shield. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, not moving an inch. If she wanted to take our memories and twist them into something rotten, I wouldn't stop her. But I wouldn't chase after her either. As her car disappeared down the street, I turned back into the house that suddenly felt twice as big and twice as empty. I sat on the floor of the living room, staring at the blank space where our wedding photo used to hang. That's when my phone buzzed. Not a call, not from her. It was from Nolan. The message was short, but it sent a chill through me that no betrayal ever could. You were never enough for her. You never will be. I stared at the words, feeling something cold and steady settle into my chest. Not heartbreak, not even anger, just a certainty. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night, not out of grief or confusion, but because my mind was too sharp, too clear to rest. For the first time in years, I wasn't dragging a dead weight behind me, trying to pretend everything was fine. I sat by the window in the kitchen, sipping black coffee, watching the streetlights flicker and the empty road stretch into silence. Somewhere out there, Maren was figuring out where she would stay, how she would spin the story, how she would play the victim. I didn't care anymore. Let her blame me if it helped her sleep. But that text from Nolan kept circling in my mind, not because it hurt, but because it told me more than he realized. He wasn't just some side distraction for her. He had been part of a bigger plan. And if he was bold enough to message me directly, it meant he thought he had won something, that he had taken something valuable from me. The thought made me smirk into my coffee cup. He didn't even know what he'd gotten himself into. The next morning, I began setting things in motion. Quietly, efficiently, without drama. First, I went to the bank, froze every joint account we had, and opened a new one under my name only. Then I contacted my lawyer. Not the family one Maren liked, but a different one I'd worked with years ago on a business deal. Someone sharp, ruthless, someone who didn't ask unnecessary questions. By noon, the wheels were already turning. Divorce paperwork was drawn up with clear stipulations. No alimony, no access to my pension, no claim to the house. Everything in writing, everything legal. I made sure the papers were sent to both her personal email and to the new number she used to text Nolan. No room for "I didn't see it" games. Later that afternoon, I went back home and started packing her things. Not neatly, not lovingly, just practical. Clothes, books, toiletries, all shoved into cardboard boxes and left in the garage. It wasn't spiteful. It was clinical, like cleaning out a room after a tenant skipped rent. Around 5, she showed up. No knocking, no calling ahead. Just walked in, keys still in hand like she owned the place. She froze when she saw the boxes. Then she saw the empty spaces, the missing photos, the stripped walls, the absence of everything that had once made this house a home. "You're being childish," she said immediately, arms crossed. I didn't respond. I placed the divorce papers on the kitchen table and slid them toward her without a word. Her face twisted. She wasn't expecting that. She thought she'd still have time to manipulate the narrative, maybe even sneak back into my good graces with a few tears and hollow promises. But she could see it now. There was no going back. "You think you can just erase me?" she hissed. "No," I said calmly. "You erased yourself." For a moment, she just stood there, shaking with anger. She didn't know where to aim. Then, true to form, she played the only card she had left. She accused me of neglect, of not fulfilling her needs, of being too focused on work. The same tired script cheaters always fall back on when they're cornered. I let her rant, let her words hang in the air like smoke from a dying fire. When she realized I wasn't going to fight her, that her accusations were falling flat, she changed tactics. Tears, pleading, begging for another chance. She even dropped to her knees at one point, clutching the sleeve of my jacket like a child who lost their favorite toy. But I didn't flinch. I didn't feel sorry. Not anymore. I simply turned, picked up my car keys from the counter, and walked out the door without looking back. As I drove away, I glanced at the rearview mirror just once. Maren stood on the front porch, small and shivering in the dusk. The same porch where we had once carved pumpkins and drank cheap wine under the stars. She wasn't my wife anymore. She was just a stranger wearing a memory's face. And somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the last time she'd try to claw her way back into my life. But by then, it would be too late. The next few days passed like I was living in a different world. A cleaner, quieter world. Without her voice filling the rooms. Without the low hum of distrust vibrating under every conversation. I didn't tell anyone what had happened at first. I didn't rush to explain or defend myself to friends or family. The people who needed to know would find out in time, and the ones who didn't could keep their noses out of it. I wasn't about to broadcast my humiliation, and I sure as hell wasn't about to let Marin control the story. But as always, she couldn't help herself. By the end of the week, I started hearing whispers through mutual acquaintances. Suddenly, I was the villain in her version of events. She told people I had emotionally abandoned her, that I never made her feel valued, that Nolan was just someone who truly listened. It was laughable, a carefully constructed fantasy where she was the poor, neglected wife, and I was some cold-hearted workaholic. I didn't take the bait. I didn't argue with the people repeating her nonsense. I knew the truth, and deep down, so did anyone who had paid even half attention to our marriage over the years. Still, the fact that she moved so quickly to paint me as the bad guy told me exactly what kind of person she had become when I wasn't looking. Or maybe she'd always been that way, and I was just too blind to see it. One evening, as I was packing up some of her last junk from the garage, a pile of dusty books and cheap decor she insisted on keeping over the years, my phone buzzed. Not a text this time, a call. It was Nolan. I stared at the screen for a long second before answering, curiosity getting the better of me. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice low, steady. There was a pause on the other end, like he wasn't sure how to start. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You should know Marin isn't coming back to you. She's mine now." I almost laughed. "Almost. You can keep her," I said before hanging up. But something in his voice bothered me. It wasn't triumph. It was desperation. Curiosity turned into suspicion. I had no intention of stalking them or sinking to some bitter, vengeful level, but I needed to understand why Nolan, a man who supposedly won, sounded like he was warning me rather than gloating. The next day, I made a few calls of my own, quiet ones, discreet ones. It didn't take long for the real story to surface. Marin wasn't happily building a new life with Nolan. In fact, within days of moving in with him, things had gone downhill fast. Nolan wasn't just a casual fling. He was a disaster with a charming smile. He had debts, serious ones. Gambling, mostly. He didn't own the place he lived in. He was squatting in a rundown rental with unpaid utilities stacked to the ceiling. And Marin, thinking she had traded up for a newer, freer life, had walked straight into a nightmare she couldn't control. It got worse. Apparently, Nolan had a temper, the kind that flared over nothing. Neighbors had heard shouting, furniture breaking, threats being screamed at 2 a.m. While I had been sitting in my clean house, sipping coffee, and sleeping like a stone, Marin had been living a real-life horror movie. And she had chosen it over me, over the life we built, over every damn thing we promised each other. There was a dark satisfaction in knowing she had to lie in the bed she made. But I wasn't celebrating. Not really. I didn't want her back. I didn't want her suffering. I didn't want anything from her anymore. I just wanted her gone. Cleanly, legally, forever. The problem was Marin wasn't done yet. A week later, she showed up at my doorstep again, not crying, not yelling, but begging, pleading for one more chance, saying Nolan wasn't who she thought he was, that she had made a mistake, that she wanted to come home to fix things, to rebuild. She even knelt there on the front step, hands clasped together, tears running down her cheeks like a bad soap opera actress. Neighbors watched through their windows. I didn't care. I stood there, arms crossed, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no hate, no anger, just a kind of deep, peaceful emptiness. "You made your choice," I said, my voice calm. "Final." She sobbed harder, clutching at the door frame like a woman drowning. I didn't move. And then, when she realized begging wasn't going to work, the real Marin reemerged. Her face twisted into something ugly, venomous. She spat out accusations that I had trapped her, that I had pushed her into Nolan's arms, that it was my fault for not being exciting enough, spontaneous enough, rich enough. It was pathetic. And in a strange way, it was freeing, because standing there, listening to her hurl every bitter excuse she could think of, I realized something simple and true. I didn't lose her. She lost me, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. After that night, Marin stopped coming around, at least physically. But the damage she tried to inflict didn't end there. Like a wounded animal lashing out, she switched strategies from begging to sabotage. First came the rumors. Quiet ones whispered through mutual friends, casual acquaintances, anyone gullible enough to lend her a sympathetic ear. She told them I had been controlling, that I was cold, unfeeling, distant. She crafted a version of events where she was the brave survivor of an unhappy home instead of the architect of her own downfall. First, I ignored it, let people believe whatever suited them. But ignoring the problem only emboldened her. It escalated. I started getting strange calls from unknown numbers. Hang-ups, heavy breathing, muffled voices cursing before disconnecting. Then one afternoon, returning from the grocery store, I found the side of my car keyed with a long, jagged line from bumper to headlight. No note, no witnesses. But I didn't need a confession. I knew exactly who was behind it. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even angry. If anything, I pitied her, watching her spiral, losing whatever shred of dignity she had left, while I stood back and built a better life for myself. The court date for the divorce was coming up quickly, and my lawyer assured me that every one of her petty games was only helping my case. Documented harassment, property damage, witness statements from neighbors who saw her tantrum on my porch. Still, part of me hated that it had to get this ugly. Once upon a time, we had loved each other, or at least I thought we did. Now, looking back, I wasn't sure if Maren ever loved anyone besides herself. The day of the divorce hearing arrived on a gray Thursday morning. I wore a simple navy suit. Nothing flashy, just clean, professional, serious. Maren showed up late, flustered, wearing a cheap dress that might have looked decent in a club but looked ridiculous in court. She didn't meet my eyes. She clung to her new lawyer, a greasy-looking man who seemed more interested in arguing than actually winning. The proceedings were fast, clinical, almost cold. My lawyer shredded every weak accusation Maren's side tried to throw at me. They presented no evidence, no credible witnesses, only vague claims of emotional neglect, without any substance behind them. Meanwhile, we had screenshots of her relationship with Nolan, copies of financial records showing the drained accounts, and statements from neighbors and friends. The judge barely even hesitated. Divorce granted, no alimony. Maren was ordered to vacate any joint properties and was denied any claim to my pension or savings. It was over, or so I thought. Leaving the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. It was raining, a light, cleansing drizzle that felt almost symbolic. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, sat behind the wheel, and just breathed. No tears, no regret, just an overwhelming sense of relief. But as I turned the ignition, I noticed something tucked under my windshield wiper. A letter, handwritten. No envelope, just folded once with my name scrolled across the front in messy ink. For a moment, I considered tossing it without reading. Another plea, another attack. But curiosity got the better of me. I unfolded the page and read. You think you've won. You think you're free. But some chains don't break that easily. You'll see soon. No signature. But the handwriting was familiar. Sloppy. Angry. Maren. I crumpled the letter in my fist, feeling a cold knot settle in my stomach. Not fear, not exactly, just the realization that Maren's downfall wasn't finished. That she wouldn't fade quietly into the past like a bad dream. She was going to drag this out as long as she could, as if trying to prove that if she couldn't be happy, she'd make damn sure I wouldn't be either. But she underestimated one thing. I wasn't the man she thought she left behind. I wasn't broken. I wasn't weak. And I wasn't going to let her or anyone dictate how my story ended. She had written her chapter. Now it was time for me to write mine. The letter stayed crumpled in my glove compartment for days like a bad omen I refused to acknowledge. I got on with my life, or at least tried to. I kept working, kept exercising, kept building new routines in the house that no longer echoed her absence. But something was different now. There was a constant, low hum of vigilance buzzing in the back of my mind. A sense that Maren wasn't done. She wasn't capable of letting go quietly. She had always needed to win, even when there was nothing left to fight for. A week after the divorce was finalized, I came home from work to find the lock on my front door scratched up, like someone had tried to jam a key that didn't fit. Nothing inside was stolen or broken, But little things were off. Drawers half open, couch pillows tossed around. A faint smell of her cheap perfume hanging in the air. She had been here. I changed the locks that night, installed cameras the next morning, and called the police to file a report. They were sympathetic but powerless. She hadn't technically broken in. It was still her name on some of the old paperwork, even if the court had stripped her of every right to the property. The next attack was more subtle. Anonymous emails sent to my employer, full of wild accusations, alleging misconduct, harassment, fraud. No evidence, of course, just enough noise to cause a headache. Luckily, my boss had known me for years and saw right through it. But the message was clear. Maren didn't care if she burned her own reputation down as long as she could throw gasoline on mine. I kept documenting everything. Every incident, every call from a blocked number, every anonymous email, every scratch on my car, every dead flower left on my porch. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about building a wall of proof, something solid enough that when I finally crushed this madness, there would be no doubts about who was the villain. One night around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I knew better than to answer, but this time I didn't ignore it. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up and held the phone away from my ear, recording the call. On the other end, a slurred voice. "Maren, you ruined everything," she hissed. "You think you're free, Dalton? You'll never be free." Then a click. Silence. I sat there in the dark, the blue glow of the phone screen the only light in the room, feeling the final thread snap inside me. This had gone on long enough. The next morning, I met with my lawyer again. Not just about restraining orders or harassment charges, though we filed those immediately. No, I wanted more than that. I wanted protection that couldn't be twisted or delayed. I moved forward with selling the house, the place where too many memories still lingered like smoke after a fire. I found a buyer within days. A young couple excited to start their first chapter where I was closing my last. With the proceeds, I bought a small, modern condo in another part of the city. A fresh start. No forwarding address for Maren. No more traces for her to follow. But before the sale was finalized, something happened that almost derailed everything. 3 days before closing, I came home late from a long meeting. As I pulled into the driveway, headlights flashed behind me, high beams, blinding. I barely had time to react before a beat-up sedan screeched to a halt inches from my bumper. The driver's door slammed open. Maren staggered out, barefoot, mascara smeared, wearing what looked like the same wrinkled dress from our court hearing. She ran toward me, screaming my name, screaming curses, screaming about betrayal and forgiveness and forever. I didn't move. I didn't engage. I locked the car doors and hit record on my phone. Neighbors' lights flicked on one by one. Curtains twitched. Phones were probably already dialing 911. Maren pounded on the hood of my car, tears streaming down her face, shrieking like a wounded animal. And still, I felt nothing, no guilt, no sadness, just a calm, detached pity for the woman who had burned every bridge behind her and now stood howling alone in the ashes. When the police arrived, they handled it professionally. She was gently but firmly taken away, screaming still, kicking at the ground, her hands cuffed behind her back. I watched from the driver's seat, the flashing red and blue lights painting her figure against the darkness. One of the officers came over afterward, polite but tired. "She won't be bothering you for a while," he said. "And if she does, it'll only help your case." I nodded, thanked him, and finally drove away. That night, standing in the empty living room for the last time, I looked around at the place that had been both a home and a prison. I remembered all the little moments, good and bad, stacked on top of each other like unstable blocks in a tower. And I realized it didn't matter anymore. The tower had fallen. The dust had settled. It was time to build something new. Not for her. Not for revenge. For me. The day after Maren's meltdown and arrest, I finalized the sale of the house. No second thoughts. No regret. As I handed over the keys to the bright-eyed young couple, I felt something heavy lift off my shoulders, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. I watched them drive away, probably imagining all the holidays and happy memories they would create there. And I hoped they would. I hoped the ghosts I left behind wouldn't follow them. With the move to my new place came a silence I hadn't known in a long time. A true, peaceful silence. No whispered arguments behind closed doors. No second-guessing every text message. No invisible wall between two people pretending to still be in love. It was a clean break. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. I focused on rebuilding my life with ruthless precision. Every day was structured, every goal crystal clear. I didn't date. I didn't even think about it. I poured myself into work, into the gym, into the quiet little hobbies I used to neglect because I was too busy trying to fix a marriage that had already rotted from the inside out. Woodworking, hiking, photography, things Marin used to mock as boring, now became my therapy. Weeks turned into months, and slowly people stopped asking about her. Friends who were really friends understood what had happened without me needing to spell it out. The fake ones, the ones who had taken sides or spread gossip, disappeared like smoke in the wind. I didn't chase after anyone. I didn't explain myself. I simply let time and truth do their work. One evening, coming back from a solo weekend hiking trip, I found an envelope slipped under my new apartment door. No name, no address, just a plain white envelope with my name scribbled on it. My heart sank. Not again. I thought about throwing it away unopened. But some stupid part of me, the part that hadn't yet been burned down to ash, made me sit at the kitchen table and open it carefully. Inside was a letter neatly written. No threats this time, no anger, just a quiet, desperate confession. It was from Marin. She admitted everything. How she had planned the trip with Nolan months in advance. How she had already decided to leave before she ever stepped into that car. How the journey was just an excuse to start a new life with someone she thought would give her more excitement, more freedom. She talked about how Nolan turned out to be a nightmare. Abusive, violent, unstable. How she had ended up homeless after he kicked her out when the money ran dry. How none of her friends wanted to help her once they saw the mess she had made. She ended the letter with a line that stopped me cold. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know you were the only real thing in my life. I see that now, and I hate myself for not seeing it before. I sat there for a long time, staring at the words, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not satisfaction, just nothing. I folded the letter back up, walked to the balcony, and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. The letter slipped from my fingers and floated down into the night like a dead leaf. It wasn't that I couldn't forgive her. It was that forgiveness didn't matter anymore. She didn't exist in my world. Not really. She was a chapter already written, already closed, already gathering dust on a shelf I no longer bothered to visit. In the months that followed, life continued to rebuild itself around me, stronger than before. Promotions at work, new friendships, even eventually, quiet, tentative steps toward letting someone new into my life, someone honest, someone real. But I didn't rush it. I wasn't the same man who once trusted blindly, loved recklessly. I had learned not to be cold, not to be bitter, but to be awake, fully, brutally awake to what real love, a real partnership, looked like. Marin had thought she was chasing freedom when she ran away from me. What she never realized was that I was the freedom she'd never find again. And by losing her, I had finally found mine. The seasons shifted, and so did my life. Without Marin's shadow darkening my door, everything started to grow again. Slow but sure, like green shoots after a forest fire. I didn't force anything. I didn't chase after happiness. I simply lived fully and honestly and trusted that whatever was meant for me would find its way. And it did. One random Saturday morning, while grabbing coffee at a small local shop, I met someone. Not in some grand, cinematic way. No fireworks, no movie soundtrack swelling in the background. Just a smile. A real, warm, genuine smile from across the counter. Her name was Elise. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just was. Over time, I discovered that with the right person, love doesn't feel like a battle you have to win or a prize you have to earn. Feels like breathing. Natural, effortless, safe. Elise didn't need me to save her from herself. She didn't want a project or a pedestal. She simply wanted a partner. And that's exactly what she became. We took things slow, slower than I ever thought I was capable of. No rushing, no blind leaps, just small moments built on trust, on laughter, on honesty. It wasn't always perfect, but it was always real, and that made all the difference. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my condo, now our condo, watching the city lights dance in the distance, Elise leaned her head on my shoulder and said softly, "I'm glad you found me." I smiled, feeling the weight of those words settle warmly inside me. "I didn't find you," I said. "I found myself first, and that's how I was ready when you came along." The past didn't disappear. It was still there. The lessons, the scars, the memories, but it no longer defined me. It no longer held me back. Marin was just a chapter. Elise was the beginning of a brand new book. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back anymore. I was exactly where I was meant to be, finally truly free.